Can everybody hear me?
I'm not seeing how I can. Oh, mute all. There it is. I've now muted everybody.
I'm Richard Trudeau. I'm the chair of the board of directors of the UU Multiracial Unity Action Council. We're going to begin with our founder, the Reverend Dr. Finley Campbell, who's going to light a chalice and make a few remarks. And then I will try to moderate in a reasonable way our conversation. Finley, you're on. Please unmute yourself.
All right. My companion and comrade in the struggle has the chalice. We light this chalice for three reasons. First, I want to honor our brother who is being operated on today, Peter Hughes. Dr. Peter Hughes, one of our great scholars, theologians, had an emergency, could not make our meeting in Geneva, had to be rushed by air from Paris to Toronto. And today he is undergoing an operation for cancer. So I want to kind of dedicate this wonderful forum to those kinds of theologians that had shaped our faith when we once were fully committed to the vision of Unitarian Universalism. We light this chalice to signify that the light of multiracial Unitarian Universalism still shines in the darkness of racial conflict, what I call neo-racism, and others simply call racism. In that darkness, this chalice is lit. And the darkness, as John once said, hath not overcome the light, but alas, the light has not yet overcome the darkness. But oh Lord, oh history, oh our brothers and sisters, one day, that light shall overcome the darkness. We shall overcome. Amen.
Does that complete your remarks, Finley?
Complete my remarks.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is intended to be just a completely open forum to discuss the proposed Article 2 changes. I would be less than forthcoming, though, if I didn't admit that this group, the UU Multiracial Unity Action Council, we have three dogs in this fight. One is our mission is to promote multiracial unity in UU congregations and elsewhere. And we are afraid that these proposed changes will make it easier for national officials to impose their own theory of how to fight racism on UU congregations. I'm referring to the theory whose rallying cry is dismantle our white supremacy culture. And we at the UU Multiracial Unity Action Council, we feel that's a wrong path that's going to make the relations between the races worse. We feel it is in fact racist. I mean, it's anti-white racist on the surface, but in a subtle way, it's anti-black and brown racist. And of course, that's more important. It will benefit a few black and brown insiders, but it's condescending to the black and brown rank and file, whom are viewed not as victim or not as survivors or warriors, but just as helpless victims that cannot possibly succeed unless they get a hand up from white people. This is, we feel, is nonsense and dangerous. Our second dog in the fight is, our mission statement is that we promote multiracial unity using the 7 UU principles, and the proposed Article 2 changes eliminate the 7 principles. So that's the second dog we have in the fight. And the third dog we have in the fight is that simply that we are Unitarian Universalists. We feel that Unitarian Universalism is it's not what the trustees say it is. It's a pretty well-defined network of ideas with a 250-year history in our country, and we feel that it's imperiled by these proposed Article 2 changes. And so that's all I have to say. I am capable of putting up a nice version of the proposed changes that show what's been deleted and what's been added, and if that becomes important to put that on our common screen, I can do that. But this is now a completely open thing, and please, though there are so many of us, please use this raise hand feature. If you're on a laptop, at the bottom there may be a button that says raise hands, or there may be a button that says reactions, and if you click the up arrow you get raise hand as an option. And what that does is it enables me to call on people in order, and it also moves your window right to the front. See, two people have their hands up already, those little yellow hands, and their windows have been moved right to the front, so it's easy to call on people in order. So I'm going to begin by calling on Dick Burkhardt and Mona Lee.
Hello, yeah, I just put into chat my own proposed rewrites to the Article 2 as it exists in the bylaws now. After looking at the proposed changes from the UUA Article 2 Commission, I sat down a few days ago and one morning came up with what I thought was a much more concise and logical and coherent version. So that's in the chat box over about 4 different chats. So if anyone wants to compare a more thoughtful rewrite versus what they did, that could be useful.
And Dick's version has the 7 principles intact.
Well, not totally intact. I actually made the 7 principles more concise with a few revisions also. Some exactly the same, but some a little more updated a little bit, or more as concise as I could possibly make them. But the sources are also much different, and they include Islam in there. Totally different in organization.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dick and Mona Lee. Please lower your hand. Julie, if possible, could you please turn on your camera? I know we haven't made that a
Oh,
condition.
sorry. Sorry, I
It's just
forgot.
nice to see who we're talking to. Thank you. Go ahead.
You're welcome. Yeah, I just wanted to let people know that on one of these kinds of Zooms with this, another organization that's concerned about the 7 principles being eliminated, on one of these Zooms, I started an intercongregational email list. It's open to any Unitarian anywhere who is concerned about the 7 principles being eliminated and would like to save them. So if you'd like to be on that email list, my email is julie@pinefish.com, and I'm putting it in the chat now too. It's Julie, Julie, at Pinefish. That's like a pine tree and a fish, but one word.com. I also have a PDF of the current Article 2 with the 7 principles side by side with the proposed revised Article 2 from UUA. That's very useful in informing congregation members that don't know the 7 principles are about to be erased, perhaps, if this goes through. So I could send anyone who would like that PDF of the current Article 2 with the 7 principles, and on the other side, the revised Article 2 that the UUA is pushing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me cut in just for a second. What the UUA has published is the proposed new Article 2, but without, excuse me, without making clear what's being eliminated. And it's really useful to see it done in a more traditional way, where the present Article 2 is presented, and then the business that's being changed, being eliminated, crossed out, and the additions underlined. That's what Julie is proposing to provide. I wanted to make one other remark about the chat. Lots of information is going to go into the chat during this conversation. If before you leave the meeting I'm assuming you have a laptop. If before you leave the meeting, you click on the chat, and at the very bottom of it, you'll see there are three little dots at the very bottom of the chat. There are three little dots, and if before you leave the meeting you click on those three little dots, save chat is one option, and it will be saved to your computer, and you'll have all of this information saved on your computer. Julie, would you please lower your hand, or Matt, maybe you could lower.
Sure, I'll do.
Yeah. Jay, hi.
Oh, first of all, I want to thank everyone for attending. There've been a number of sessions, so I'm really glad this is taking place. So, Richard, thank you and your team for putting this together. But I want to make three comments. One, I think this change about Article 2, the first step is awareness and education. I think Julie and others who are spreading the word, and this is an active activity we all should be doing. I finally broke through, and I believe I'm going to get a official adult education program at my home church, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta, to discuss Article 2. So I would recommend as step one of getting education, as other churches hold some formal education program. The second thing is education then has to follow by some action, and this has to do with getting individuals to become delegates to the upcoming General Assembly. I'll say this again, this is all about counting votes. And so the second part is becoming a delegate and participating in the mini assemblies, the business assemblies that I think will take place in May. And the third thing, so education, become delegates, but also get consensus from church members to vote as blocks to make a decision, as opposed to individuals. That we need to have a strong voice of voting for this. I would vote no. I'm voting no on these changes as they exist today. So we have to do that in order to have an impact. Talking about it is great, but we actually have to whip votes, as they say in the business. That's all I got.
Thank you, Jay. Sarah, please unmute.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have one question and one comment. I would like to hear if anyone has, and perhaps you do, a history behind the reason behind the changes. My understanding was that it came out of widening the circle, and I don't know if that's true. So I just wanted to ask if someone knew what the history was behind a review of the principles and these new values.
Richard?
I may, in 1 second, have an answer to that question.
I would also like to make a comment too, because that's a very important question from Sarah.
I'm reading from the current issue of UU World. It's a report on the General Assembly last June. The General Assembly endorsed the board's plan to do a comprehensive rewrite of the UUA bylaws, by the way, not only Article 2, all of the bylaws, to remove overly complicated and inefficient governance. That's the only reason I've heard from the officials. Overly complicated and inefficient. In my own personal opinion, there's no good reason whatsoever.
May I answer as well, Richard?
Sure.
So I had an opportunity to attend a presentation by Paula Cole-Jones, who's a supporter of the eighth principle. It was a 2-hour session where she presented all the rationale behind the eighth principle. And when she came to the end, kind of like, this is the point, there was a shocking slide that she showed, and there were 2 circles with an arrow, with the eighth principle being the arrow going across. And what we were leaving, for her projections of the eighth principle, what we were leaving or needed to leave behind was our UU principles. Because they, in her language, was written by the dominant culture, translate that as white, or specifically, you're talking about the 85 principles, white women. But that is a very critical message about the dismantling of Unitarian Universalism that appeared in the previous issue, the spring issue of UU World. I don't think this has a motivation behind increasing the spirituality or bringing it up to date. There's a different agenda on the table for this change. And you just have to be blunt about that.
And say more about that, Jay, because I'm not sure I understand what you're referring to.
So in 2017, the UUA went through the declaration of white supremacy culture, widening the circle of concern, reaffirmed that, made certain recommendations. But the key element, and it's in the, I don't have my copy handy, the spring issue, that the association is going through a widespread transformation to remove white supremacy culture from our denomination and association. And in Paula's presentation, she was explicit. Part of that dismantling is removing the 7 principles.
Okay. I understand that perspective now. My second question is that I did attend one other forum on this, and there were some ministerial concerns about freedom of the pulpit being impacted by these changes, and I'm wondering if anyone else has heard that concern. Guess not.
Would you say
Okay.
would you say a little more about what the concern is?
Well, I attended a forum and there were 2 ministers present, and both of them voiced some concern with the new values, I guess, as they're being considered, are called having an impact on top-down ministry, and that how that might affect freedom of the pulpit, their ability to preach as their particular individual theology calls them to do.
I see. So maybe the fear is that they might get excommunicated like Eclaw.
No, nothing quite that bad. Just that that there is some concern that there would be a loss of their ability to control their pulpit words. And I don't know anything more than that. And that's the question I'm asking. Is that a concern beyond 1 or 2 people?
Sarah, go ahead.
Well, I can say too that, one of the principles they removed was the 4th principle, which had a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and also the 5th principle on the right of conscience and democratic process. And so I think it was especially that was referring to the 5th principle, and the proposed rewrite does nothing about right of conscience or democratic process. And they have said that they will make some new wording that includes something about democratic process. They have not said anything about right of conscience. Now, this is partially covered under a separate section on freedom of belief. So the freedom of belief says you have freedom of belief, and that should help ministers. But since it's being removed from the principles, there's a lot of concern that in practice, that freedom of belief may be ignored, like it was for Eckloff and many others, actually, right now. Many ministers are very careful on what they say now. And so a lot depends on the implementation, and that's the bigger concern.
I wanted to say something in answer to the question of why they're doing this. I think that was her first question, basically. And, for decades, the Unitarian movement tried to be more multicultural and have people from all different colors and cultures and things like that. And for example, they tried lots of things, and one of them they even had they gave our community. We live in one of the most multicultural neighborhoods in the country, and they gave. We are only 1/3 white, 1/3 African American, and 1/3 Asian. Anyway, so they gave us a free minister for 5 years to try to attract the population in the neighborhood, and we became somewhat multicultural, but it doesn't work because religion is cultural, and they go to churches that if we were preaching the gospel and things, we probably would have gotten a lot of African Americans, but we didn't. Anyway, so they hired these people, I think, in Boston, who really, I don't even think they're really Unitarian Universalists, but they're people who believe in critical race theory, and they're African Americans, and that's what they're promoting, and that's why they're revising the Article 2 and making it the way these people want it to be. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I think she's saying that they think the 7 principles and Robert's Rules of Order and bylaws are just examples of white supremacy culture. That's basically what their attitude is.
Hey, let me cut in for a minute. Then let's go back to calling on people in order. At least one aspect of the proposed Article 2 revision erodes congregational polity, that is, the independence of congregations. And I think that's behind what some of those ministers were, that fear that some of those ministers were expressing, that the congregations are going to be put under the thumb of the UUA. They're not going to be independent anymore. Barbara, could you please put on your camera and please speak? Please unmute also. Go ahead.
Right, here I am. Thank you. So I live in the Hudson Valley area of New York State, if that means anything to anyone. My husband and I participate in UU Congregation of the Catskills. In my congregation, this change is being promoted as having an 8th principle. There is no talk of changing the 7 principles as they exist that I understand. Rather, it's just spoken of in terms of tacking on principle number 8. And I can't remember the exact, drafting of it, but having to do with dismantling racism and promoting, non-oppression among the races. So it's very enlightening to me to hear of all the other changes that are proposed here, and I appreciate the comments of the people who have spoken so far. I just want to say that while I myself, of course, am all for dismantling, I'm going to say it, white supremacism, and I certainly don't mean that in any oppressive way to anyone. But I would be happy to see any kind of demographic supremacism to be history, and to have liberation across, every, let it flow. Let's just put it that way, regardless of what anybody's demographic status happens to be. My concern is that if there is a principle that targets just one of these isms, then what about the others? So in other words, if there's an 8th principle that would speak to ending racism, then what about sexism? What about moneyism? What about ageism? What about cisgenderism and heterosexualism, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you understand where I'm coming from. And if, and then it's like, well, why is this ism, number 8 or 9, and this other one 10 or 11? Isn't 10 or 11 as important as 8 or 9? It gets crazy that way. And
Yes.
I would say more generally in our world society, to me, it seems as if those who engage in sociopathic attitudes and behaviors really like to put wedges between people who are oppressed so that they turn on each other, as opposed to saying, let's just end oppression, and let's just do liberation. And I would add, in my view, liberation certainly includes earth liberation, animal liberation, respect for ecosystems, and all that kind of thing too. We've got to watch out for the species chauvinism that we all have. Anyway, I think I've said enough, made some points, I hope. And thank you, everybody, for the forum.
Yes, thank you. Stephen. Oh, please unmute yourself, Stephen.
Yes. Hi, I'm Steve Miles, and I am a member of a UU church in the DC metropolitan area. I have put together, I am operating under the assumption that this whole change has not really been made aware to all the congregants in my congregation. I sent out an email to a good number of my friends in the congregation and telling them and basically comparing Article 2 proposal with what our current principles are, and telling them that our current principles were about to be thrown out. The reaction was overwhelming. Everybody was pissed. I went to the service, and the minister called me a troublemaker and asked that I not, stir up the anxiety of the congregation. To which I responded, "There's sometimes when it's good to get into good trouble." And so basically, my approach on all this is, please do not try to rewrite our principles. Do not try to improve the Article 2 proposal with words and how it can be made better or what you do or do not agree with it. This is a fundamental attack on what we as Unitarian Universalists believe in. And they've gone just flat too far. We have allowed them to have the power that they have because most of us are afraid to speak up because we don't want to be labeled a racist. The worst thing that a liberal can feel is being labeled a racist, especially from other racists or from other liberals. My approach should be that we need to play the game on their turf. And the way to do that is demand the board and the congregation, the board of your congregation and your minister, that they hold a secret ballot vote of the entire congregation. That can be done very easily electronically. Then number two, and that vote should only be, do you accept throwing out our principles and replacing them with this Article 2 proposal? Yes or no? Then the second thing should be requiring that the delegates from that congregation that go to GA must abide by the vote that was taken in that congregation. That voting by their conscience doesn't cut it. I mean, that may be good when we're doing one or two things, but everybody on this call really should view that what is happening is an attack on your beliefs. And rather than try to modify that or understand the reason, just stand up and say, that's not acceptable. I don't buy it. We do not have a white supremacy culture. We are not racists, and our current principles, when they are properly explained, handle everything.
Thank you, Steve. Lincoln.
Yeah, hi. I had a further comment to the person who expressed concern from a couple of ministers about freedom of the pulpit. I think that that's a valid concern. Okay, and the reason I think it's valid is that, leave Eckloff aside, okay, the UUA has already removed from fellowship another minister who expressed positions, Kate Rohde, who has actually presented, I think, a sermon in this group, whom I've known for 16 years. She was my pastor for 16 years, and I was the president of the board of that congregation at the time that she left. I worked with her very closely for a year. And so I think it is very likely, actually, that if wind gets up, that ministers are preaching in a way that is contrary to the current approach, they could see censure. Censure. They could be sanctioned either by the UUMA or even have their fellowship threatened. So I think it's a very valid concern. I know of a current minister of the church where Kate is now minister emerita, which is that congregation I was a member of in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And I know the minister there's very much concern from those who are aware of what's going on and who knew Kate when I was there, that they don't want to involve their minister in this because they want to protect him. And my guess is Dan, his name is, probably doesn't want to speak out for fear that he could be hurt. And a former minister of our church who resigned prior to our most recent resignation for other reasons, expressed concern to me that there is a very strong, she's very aware of the social pressure to fall in line. She's a much younger minister, I won't mention her name, who graduated from Union Theological Seminary, and ours was her second church. And she agreed that there's enormous pressure to toe the line. I think I'll end my remarks with that and take my hand down. Thanks.
Yeah, it's true that the UU Ministers Association is in favor of everything that the national UU officials are doing. Rebecca.
So hello. So I think Lincoln is very right that there's tremendous pressure on the ministers to toe the line. I personally feel an obligation to try to protect my minister. He does not feel comfortable speaking openly about all of this. He's not that far from retirement. So that is an issue. I also wanted to, someone had asked about sort of why are they doing this, and do these pastors have concerns? So in the report by the Council for Institutional Change and Widening the Circle on page 25, if you have a PDF copy of it, in reference to Principle 4, it says that the free and responsible church search for truth and meaning. This has become to be interpreted almost exclusively through an individualistic lens, that we operate as a collective based on principles. So this free and responsible search should be done within the boundaries of communities. So this is what they have against the fourth principle. And I see no hope that they would put that back into their value statement. They are asking new questions when the congregations submit their budgets to UUA. They're asking new questions about what is your congregation doing in the area of racial justice. There's been a real focus on that. That's coming, I believe, from the eighth principle people. Back in 2017, there was a proposal that the congregations were to biannually recertify, and a part of that had to do with describing their commitment to racial justice. I'm also really concerned, and I think the ministers are concerned, about the purposes clause, which changes the purpose of the organization from serving the congregations to equipping the congregations. And when I brought this up in one of the feedback sessions, people actually laughed at me. They said, oh, well, if we don't like what they're doing, we'll just ignore them. But you can't just ignore them. They're rewriting the religious education materials. They're controlling who's out there applying for new positions as ministers. They are making it extremely difficult for our congregations to communicate with one another. The removal of the letters to the editor from UU World is a big example of that. So Julie's little email list is an attempt to give people a backdoor way to communicate with each other, which is just really lacking. So yes, there is serious concern about freedom of the pulpit. And I mean, I'm personally doing what I can to oppose the adoption of this proposal. I do know that they are going to be putting something who knows what. They're going to put something about democracy back into their proposal. And they are also rewriting the last sentence of the purposes that has something to do with liberation. And the person who just spoke about liberating, I think they're using a different definition of what that means. And that's another issue, is they define words differently than many people. I guess I've said enough, but there I am. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. Julie.
Yeah, there's so many issues here, and I don't want to take up a lot of time, but just on the email list, people are talking about the strategy and the things we can do to maybe say the 7 principles. And there are all kinds of things that are coming up and happening in congregations. For example, in groups and classes in the local congregations. In my congregation, people from the social justice group will say, oh, nobody's changing the 7 principles. Nobody's proposing getting rid of the 7 principles. They're just being reflected on every 15 years. We're just taking another look at them. So there's a lot of deception going on. And, people are trying to help each other strategize about how to deal with that, for example. And just asking questions about the history, like the fact that there was a hire years ago someone was hired by the UUA for a position. It was a white male. A Latino woman protested and said it was racist, and the person withdrew his application after that. But that accusation of racism is an important part of the history here. So anyway, there is a whole lot going on, and strategy is very necessary. Regardless of whether you what you do about it, you may want to be thinking about some things like, please copy this chat. Please, when you're in a Zoom, a local Zoom or a UUA meeting, please record it or copy the chat or whatever, because there are going to be some lies and deceptions, and there are going to be some arguments that you're going to want to know how to counter. Oh, next time, they say, for example, the UUA is just us. We're the member of the congregations. They're just doing what we want. The next time that comes up, say you didn't give the best counter argument to that. This time, the next time that comes up, you'll have the argument copied down. You can come up with your responses. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay.
I wanted to respond to Barbara about the 8th principle and Article 2. I attended Barbara's session because I was as confused as everybody else. Is the 8th principle something? Is Article 2 something? Is 8th principle part of this? Paula, who's is in the inside of all this, was, I think, unclear intentionally. But it was clear and unambiguous what I had said earlier, that the 8th principle was the gateway, is the term she used, to go from where we are today to this notion of communities within communities. And so it is ambiguous what the 8th principle is attempting to do without the context of Article 2. So if anyone says they know what's going on, even people on the inside give unclear definition of that. And I think we should have clarity and demand that from our leadership on that. So right now, it seems like anyone who wants to believe anything is okay, because we really don't have a definitive statement from our leadership on that.
Mm-hmm. Matt.
Here I am. Thanks. Some of the points I was pulling together was spoken to by others. I have concerns about, again, the recasting of the purpose from serving member congregations to the language. Again, I did post a link to the current proposed draft, although I know they're looking to modify it, but the purposes are being changed. And just to skip the part that wasn't covered, they've replaced the language of the principles and sources with these words, but it's the use of the word covenant and how it's being defined that I find problematic. It also was person to person and to the denomination or something. There's language I didn't have a chance to tweeze out, but it's how they define it, and then I should also add that I attended the last of the online discussions about the proposed changes. So by that point, the host had heard from a number of people, and they did say that they would be making further changes to be submitted to the Board of Trustees in December, but I don't think we will get a chance to comment on them before those mini assemblies in May. But we were reassured by one of the hosts that nothing in these proposed changes is intended to change congregational politics, a polity rather. And here again, that's weak sauce as far as I'm concerned. What is intended, once it's enshrined in the bylaws, that's that, and then it's up to others to interpret them. And just a quick comment about how we are trying to spread the word. I know I'm a member of First Parish in Wayland, Massachusetts. Like many of our congregations, most of the folks don't pay attention to denominational matters. They don't really care about the UUA. And I said this in an earlier UMIAC forum. And for those who like their Tolkien, we are like the hobbits in the Shire, enjoying our hobbit life while the darkness is gathering around us. And action needs to be taken. But my experience in politics and my professional training in cognition tells me that it's tricky how you first go public, given that so much of the institution is already putting forth a certain program. And like many of us, we are labeled troublemakers and if not heretics, by doing a frontal assault. Sadly, because we got a late start on this, it's easier to create a mindset and a framework at the front end than to change one later. So the task is much different and onerous cognitively. It's best done person to person with people who already know you and know you're not a troublemaker. And I have been meeting quietly, one-on-one with movers and shakers at my church, and I would recommend the rest of us, having gained a more robust knowledge of the issues here, to take those talking one-on-one, preferably over food and drink. It helps open the mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bob?
Hello, this is my first time at this meeting, and I've been very impressed by what I've heard from people. So thanks for having it. Wanted to make a few comments. I'm in Akron, Ohio, and I go to the UU Church of Akron. The whole thrust of this, if you read the background from critical race theory, is illiberal. So they seem to be denying democracy. And I'll come back to that in a minute. There's been no discussion at our church. But we have had a group of about 30 people that have gotten together in the last week to try to spread the word about what's going on. Our church's Facebook page is censored. Attempts to put things on the Facebook page have been denied, and the bulletin boards are controlled. So we can't post anything on a board either. We have a Right Relations Committee for about a year that's been acting, and several people have been, I believe, harmed by that, and at least 3 have left the church. They introduced the notion of microaggression, which seems to be another imaginary thing that's invented to make people angry, much like war on Christmas. And that was quite concerning. And then at the last board meeting, they passed a measure on disruptive behavior, which allows the board to expel people from the church. This was done essentially in secret from the congregation. There was no input. Several of us went to the congregational meeting, and we were accused of acting in bad faith for asking that the congregation see this major policy change before it's instituted. So we are quite concerned about the board. And our minister also is someone who signed the document condemning the Gadfly papers. So to go back to Lord of the Rings again, I think our list of allies is getting thin. So those are the comments. I hope to be able to get on the Julie's mailing list and interact with other congregations. And it's heartening to see other people being concerned.
Thank you. Kelvin.
Everyone, I hope everyone is doing fine today. You know, when I think about this whole thing, it sickens me in this way, but I'm sure you all don't wake up every day as a white person saying, what can I do to discriminate against a Black person or show my hatred towards an Asian? You're not thinking that way. It is not a natural thing for us to hate. It is not a part of our culture. And to say that white people are racist and it is their culture, it's just as bad as seeing the violence on the south side of Chicago and saying the violence is part of Black culture. And we all know that it isn't. But they make it to be that way. We just can't help but to be who we are. And that's all the kind of things that I hear, and I can't stand it. I have been in places where I have been the only Black person being disciplined on a job or falsely accused. And I felt extremely uncomfortable and unsafe. But every time I meet with all of you, when I get a chance, I never feel unsafe. I never feel uncomfortable. I don't feel like I have to bow my head to show humility and show that I am one of the safe ones. I never have to feel that way with any of you. But this church is changing, and they picture all of you as dangerous to me. And I just don't see that. I've seen danger before coming from white people in this country, but none of you are that. And this is a thing that really makes me angry. And I said, if they're leading towards that, there's something needs to be done. Something needs to be done to stop it. One of my reasons, I come from the Black church, and I've heard a lot of things that led to my Great Depression, and it led to so many things that happened to me that was wrong. I decided I got to get away from that. It's just too much religion for me. And Dr. Campbell told me, well, come out to this congregation, check it out. And I did, and immediately I fell in love with it. I said, now this is the atmosphere that I would like. Don't judge me for who I am or what I am. Just accept me. And that's all I ever heard from all of you is acceptance. That's all I ever got. I appreciate that. And to see any changes that would change that will destroy the church, because there are many people out there who are looking for this. There are many people out there who are sick and tired of the judgments, the politics, the other crap that happens in those churches that's supposed to be of God. But if you believe in God, I cannot imagine God being that way. But these are the people who are looking for comfort in the setting of a church. But then again, you don't have to follow the rituals. You don't have to be depressed. You don't have to be upset every Sunday when you leave that church. And it feels good for a moment, but after a while, oh my God, I'm going to go to hell. Just by thought. And that's how bad it was for me. So shouting, screaming, jumping, all of that mess is just unnecessary. And if that is brought to this church, if that kind of silliness is brought to this church, it will destroy this church. And I would hate to see it. You all are wonderful people to me. I've met some of the best people in the world. Sure, I wish there were more Black people here, but that can happen. All we have to do is reach out. I would love to reach out more to my family and get them out of the mess that they've found themselves in, just like I did, and to say, hey, this is the place to be because it offers comfort and a rational thought.
Hmm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelvin. Ellen. Can't hear you, Ellen.
Oh, sorry. I want to say, Kelvin, when you testify, it always brings tears to my eyes. So thank you. But what I wanted, the way I raised my hand is because it looks to me like we have the assault has been planned for many years, and they've got all the troops in place, and they got their infiltrators, and they got it all set up, and the air assault, and we got they got the COIC report and then the COIC report is basically kind of the basis of the job description for the president. They got the president, the nomination of the president, which is somehow magically has, instead of 2, they have only 1, and we have nothing to say about it. And then, they've got it set up so that it's virtually impossible to have an alternate candidate. And now they are, first they were going to give us the 8th principle, and we're ready to stop that. But now they say, okay, we're getting rid of all the principles, and we're going to, have a mishmash of like poppycock and platitudes, and it's not listed out, so you can't attack it. It's like a cloud of, there's no way to deal with it because the substance is really unclear. So we have been, this is happening right now. It's all happening. So we got to figure out what we're going to do to respond. And I think the 7th principles, there's probably no way we're going to be able to deal with the president election. But the 7 principles, I think we got a real chance of resisting that. And what I would like is to just say, keep them the way they are. I never thought they were perfect, but they were fine. They worked, they were good. But I think we can do that. I think, even our minister didn't know that they were getting rid of the 7 principles. He was shocked when he heard it. So it's like in the cover of darkness, they have, in the fog, they got all their troops set up, and we are about to be attacked. So, and the other thing is communication. They've cut the lines of communication so badly that we can't cooperate. And I'm so glad that this group has been started of ordinary people across a lot of different congregations. That is great. And so maybe that will help us. So that's basically what I got to say.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. John. Can't hear you, John. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Please unmute yourself. There we go.
I'm speaking from France. Some of you have heard me once, I think. I'm really upset by by what's happening, because I've been a Unitarian for 60 years. And those principles are part of my own inner identity. And suspending those principles, which are for me an inner and very powerful symbol of who I am, is a big blow to who I am and to the community that I think I belong to. And so by doing away with what seems to be the basic core of my theology, that I've lived with for 60 years and has given me support and some kind of contact with my inner existence and also connected me with the infinite spirit of life, which is another word for God. I'm just I feel really sorry that we're in this mess, and I don't understand how the leadership has gotten us into a situation where this verbiage is floating around, and they're dismantling something that has been so important to our faith. And I think that our theological our theological core is being it's being imploded. And from here in Europe, I'm just sorry. I mean, I really feel a great anguish and a great emptiness and a great sorrow as to what is happening. I wrote to the president, to Susan, and asked her eventually to avoid changing the principles at all, because for me, they are interdependent. I can't take one part of those principles without having a relationship to other parts of the principles. And I don't see how those principles can be redone, can be reworked without damaging our general theological framework. I suggested to her to do something that I know about, which is, and I brought it here. I don't know if you can see it if I put it up here. It's called the Declaration of Philadelphia. And I know that for most of you, it won't mean anything, but what I'm trying to suggest is a practical way to get around the sort of tragedy that's in front of us, and to avoid dismantling the principles by allowing the general movement, the general UU movement, to express concerns that they may have in a form that will not affect our principles. The International Labor Organization in 1944, when it was going through a major transformation concerning social justice in the world, adopted what they call the Declaration of Philadelphia. And it didn't change the basic organization or principles of the International Labor Organization. What it did was put forth a declaration that has survived 80 years, but hasn't dismantled its basic objectives and goals. And I'm over here in France. I'm trying to think of how we can get away from this either this or that. It's either our principles or it's this new system of values that doesn't make much sense to me. And that this or that, instead of this or that, what I would like to see, myself personally, is for our principles to be reinforced, to be strengthened, yes, and worded as they are worded generally. And then if we really need to do something about racism, that is a concern right now, put it in the form of a declaration that the assembly, that we can, as a national movement or an international movement, can adopt, like the Declaration of Philadelphia, that has survived 80 years and is still the declaration on social justice for people all over the world. And we could do something like that too. We could also have a declaration on racism or on whatever we want to call it, without dismantling our principles. That's what I wanted to say in general. And I'm really happy about what Julie suggested. I'm over here in France. I see some trends beginning where we're restricting information, we're restricting ways of coming together. And I think that what would be wonderful is if a general list of who we are could be circulated, and her suggestion of putting the two documents side by side could be sent to everybody, and people could simply begin to communicate with each other horizontally and not just vertically, as generally is the case. So that we just simply can begin speaking. It's going to be a very tough campaign trying to save the principles. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Ken.
I'd like to comment on basic definition of one word. And there are two very different ways to approach it that have historical, personal, emotional, and religious implications. That's the word anti-racism. Traditionally, anti-racism meant addressing policy changes that needed to be made. The anti-slavery movement was changing policies, changing laws. The civil rights movement was changing policies, changing laws. Current efforts today in church-based community organizations, Reverend Barber, anti-racism means changing policies and changing laws. What has come into the picture with critical race theory, actually before that, go back to 1990, the 1990s, writing about white supremacy culture, coming out of the Black nationalist movement. What do you do with white people? Big question. Help them get rid of their racism. So racism was redefined as what's inside me, what's inside the rest of you are white. That's racism. Well, that's like sin. Is there anybody who doesn't have it? Anyway, my approach in thinking about this, I presented a paper, which I'll put a link to it into the chat room at the 2020 GA, to the UMIAC, the Unitarian Universalist Multiracial Unity Action Culture Group, contrasting racism that sees everyone working together to change policies that need changing versus racism, which is in effect a guilt trip on white people. And I'll put that link in there, and that's enough for me to say now.
A guilt trip that puts white people on the defensive and makes it easy for people to seize power. Karen.
Yes, I'm a bit unstable, so I'll get to the question I want to ask is if anybody had trouble signing on to the UUA's open house the other night. We were given a couple links, neither person's worked. We wanted to have a watch party. So I'll just put that out there and people could maybe respond in the chat to that. I did want to also tell what's going on in our congregation. We have survived a minister who had PTSD and who was othering our congregants into the us and the thems, using the victim culture, the microaggressions, and wanted to go to policy governance with the minister as CEO. Our numbers decreased by about half after she left and COVID. And we are just now coming back with, about 10% join the church. We're at around 90, 100 right now. The other piece of it was that when this came out and I wrote an email to our congregation, it resulted in a meeting where 10% went to a watch party that we couldn't have because we couldn't sign on. Agreeing with all the sentiments that I've heard here, but there's this piece about a disrespect that I think when they call us just a social club. There is this apathy. I forgot the apathy piece, like getting people to realize, hey, this is quick. We've got to have this meeting. This Sunday, they're giving out the handout and wanting to bring attention up, about this and getting people to vote individually. I am afraid of what's going to happen by the time they compile. The process is not transparent. By the time they compile everybody's individual responses and do some further tweaking, that GA is the next opportunity for us to get in there and amend it. And will we see the drafts as they go along, and will they have another time where we can comment on it? But back to the social club, I think we have to embrace that. I think we have to say, yes, we can be a social club, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is what builds community. So with that, I'll be done. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Matt.
Yeah, hi. Jumping in again. I mean, obviously, there's a lot that feeds into everything we're talking about. I had a conversation with a member of the governing board of my church. He wasn't familiar with James Luther Adams and the 5 smooth stones of liberal religion. I think Unitarian Universalism has made itself the good thing it is by being a liberal religion. And point 2 is that it should not be coercive. And I think we've heard a lot of evidence today that there's a lot of coercion going on both to our ministry and in certain congregations as some of these institutional imperatives are put into place. I should add that liberalism in general is in a tough position because it's open to attack by extremists on both the right and the left. And one thing I have heard, you actually don't have the right to believe anything you want. I think our 4th principle, which talks about a free and responsible search for truth, means you have to make your case. I think you have to be able to enter into discussion and show how you come to those conclusions. It's not totally open source. I'm trying to move through this quickly because we are time limited. I should just say that again, what I think most of us are saying here and we're seeing is a retreat from liberalism to something almost puritanical. When we talk about these right relations committees and how they're being used, the intent may be one thing, but what's being put into place is something quite different. I kind of call it the new pillory, for those who remember that term. I again want to emphasize that in terms of psychology, there's quite a difference between racism and what's called implicit bias. And the professor of psychology who coined that term has said in just those words, implicit bias is not the same thing as racism. I would tell you as a cognitive scientist myself that you can't change what you're not aware of. But how do you get someone to be aware of it is another matter. And you can't say you're racist. That drives us apart. That leads to polarization rather than a welcoming and a bringing in. Our 3rd principle talks about encouraging each other to spiritual growth, not demanding of it. And just a word about culture. I have read articles and talked to people. It's like, are our churches welcoming? Well, there is, different cultures have different ways they act. I myself came into Yankee culture here in New England from New York, where things play a little differently. And the preference for less talking, less arguing, and more quiet I'm still adjusting to it, as Richard Trudeau will attest, that it's still a learning process, but that doesn't make it inherently racist or anything else. It's just a certain culture, but I think we can all learn from each other. I think that's why we have all these sources. Why don't you try it? But still, I am a folk dancer. I have danced certain Anglo forms of dancing, Morris dancing and contra dancing. And just because the guy who rescued these native English dance forms from the ash bin of history, just because as a man of his time, he maybe didn't regard Africans as equal to Europeans, doesn't mean we should throw out those dances that he preserved because they're just English. This is the kind of overreach. We are all on the same page here for wanting to have a more equitable, fair, and equal society. It's that we're talking about how we get here from there. And one last comment in talking about it matters who is in these positions of power. It matters how we legislate these things. And I believe that was also something James Luther Adams talked about in the 5 smooth stones, that if it's not put into the institutions, what's the point? Thanks a lot. Sorry to have taken so long.
Thank you. Carl.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I want to lift up again the idea that this work that is going on at the UUA and the dismantling of the principles and really all of the work that the UUA has done in my 12 years of being in the church has been around promoting and enforcing their vision of you can call it anti-racism, you can call it neo-racism, as some of us do, but it is in the cause of bringing this work to the congregants, and I believe this vision of the work to the congregants, and I believe that throughout. I mean, we all sit here now. I would bet every single one of us has, at some point in our lives, if not still, promoting the idea of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations in our faith and in our ministries. We've all done that, and I think that our friends and our fellow congregants, they have the passion and will and desire to do this as well, because they see the injustices and the inequities throughout the world. And it, as you use, it's part of who we are, is to put our faith in action. And and the UUA is responding to that and bringing an approach that I wholeheartedly disagree with, because as evidenced by my membership in UMIAC. And so I believe that the struggle against racism is primary. It's primary. It should be primary in our work. It should be primary in our faith. It's primary for, I work to make it primary in my life. But when we consider the larger question of the thing, I don't think there's anything more fearsome to the ruling class, to use my Marxist-Leninist language. There's nothing more fearsome to them than the idea of multiracial unity. That is the last thing they want to see, is Black and white and Hispanic coming together in pursuit of a cause, in pursuit of justice. And so instead of, they have to give us something else to fill this need that we have to pursue justice and equity. And they give us fragility and white supremacy and privilege and microaggression. And I believe that the UUA's adoption of this approach will in fact maintain the ongoing racist structures that lead to the oppression of people from Appalachia to Harlem, to the South Side of Chicago, to the migrant farms of California. That in fact, the work that the tools that the UUA is giving us will in fact continue to lead to the oppression of people throughout this world, which is all well and good, because we're used to this, living in this culture. It's not just the UUA, but this is the road that the UUA is sending us down. We are presented with Tim Wise and Robin DiAngelo. Oh, Finley's getting pissed. Tim Wise and Robin DiAngelo and sessions on checking our white privilege. I did a 2-day session at the Phoenix GA on checking my white privilege. And then that's all well and good, right? That's the role of the UUA. But then when we are presented with alternatives or criticisms, or we want to discuss, we are ostracized and rejected from UMIAC, ostracized and rejected. Todd Ekloff, Kate Rohde, and so on. So I think we don't have anything left to prove to the UUA. We know their position. We know where they stand. They aren't interested. I think what we have to do is work with our fellow congregants our friends and neighbors and bring the multiracial struggle against racism, bring it primary to the work. In rejection of fragility and supremacy, we have to continue to hone our efforts. And I think that that being the base of this, the base of what the UUA is trying to do, we fight that by doing the work better, doing the work differently, and showing them that we can do this work, that we do this work within the principles, within the 7 principles. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carr, I don't know your first name, but
Jerry,
hi, Jerry.
thanks. I'm wondering if perhaps my suggestion has already been done, and it may sound hopelessly idealistic. I hope not, though, but I'm wondering if this group would benefit by going on record and asking the editor of the UU World for equal time, perhaps in a side-by-side pro and con fashion, however the editor of the UU World would hopefully choose to do it. But if we are on record of asking the editor of the UU World for time to express our views, written in a very non-defensive, rational manner, of course, that even if that request isn't honored, that at least we would be on record. And I also have to wonder if that kind of request would be condoned. We'd get more support from more ministers if that was done. I think there are a lot of ministers. I'm one of the ministers at the Flint congregation, and I'm very much interested in a democratic presentation of all these issues, and in a way that congregants will see them. And as everyone here has mentioned, there's very little awareness in many congregations about what's going on at all. And seriously, very little. Perhaps there's some other mechanism of getting the word out and getting a democratic process where people can look at all of the issues here. I just wonder, I think I'm correct in saying that the UU World has not allowed an open forum on any of these issues. And I think we all fund that through our fair share dues, those of us congregations that are able to pay them, that in a way it's a mouthpiece, the voice of all of us. Does anyone know if anyone has asked, if a large group such as this has gone on record and asking the editor of the UU World for space and on a regular basis in the coming months, not just one time? That's really all I have. And to also mention, someone mentioned that the word serve will probably, it no longer appears in the proposed Article 2. As a minister, I hope there's a great appreciation that one of the main characteristics of Unitarian Universalism is a faith that the way to go forward is that we're all trying to serve each other, and especially our organizing body. If they don't see themselves as serving us, then that gives way to egocentrism, hierarchical structure. I think if we all, in our own way, somehow insist that the word serve be maintained in Article 2, that is, in a nutshell, one of the keys to keeping things in balance and keeping our organizing body understanding that the true power is in serving, and that is the way to lead without violence and without a controlling behavior. Thanks. That's all I have.
Yeah, thank you. Mary Ellen.
This way. Okay, now I'm unmuted. First of all, I'd like to say that Calvin brought this up for me. Yo soy mexicana. And I feel in my congregation that I'm accepted as a person, the whole person, a part Mexicana, part Anglo, part, and all the things that I've done in my life. And I really appreciate that. I'm not sure that I feel that way at UUA and with GA, but in my group, I really am. And I wanted to put that on record. The other thing I wanted to say is that I think in all these threads that I've been trying to read and follow, somebody suggested that one of the things that this will do is turn UUA into a social justice organization. Now, I'm a social justice leader in our congregation, so I'm really into social justice and social justice work, but that's not all that UUA is. UUA is also a spiritual home for me. It's an intellectual home for me. It is a community that I count on and depend on for all kinds of things. So social justice, yeah, but that's not enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Letitia?
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Letitia Smith. I'm from a very small congregation based in St. Paul, Groveland Unitarian University Fellowship. My husband and I are both on the executive committee of our congregation. And I'd like to thank Richard and whoever the others who organized this, because this is the first time that I realized why I was having a hard time finding out about the Article 2 committee and accessing the papers that they were producing. So I really also thank Julie for offering the copies of what's being proposed. What I think is going on, it really is a real threat to UU. And I was involved in getting our congregation approve the 8th principle, endorse the 8th principle, but that was not without any knowledge of any of these considerations of changing the 7 principles. Because I personally have joined UU, our congregation, after not having been part of any spiritual community since I left the Catholic Church as a teenager. And so I value not only the people, but also the principles of this church. And so I think that at least from what I understand now is going on in what's being suggested, I think that a lot of us are going to leave UU if this happens, if that thing passes. I know I will do that if that change that I heard being proposed. Now, maybe changes are going to be happening anyway on that, but I think this has been really quite an eye-opener for me to realize that everybody else is having a hard time trying to find out about what is being proposed, what is the system that could potentially lead to the adoption of this. I also would like to point out that I still think that it is true that our institutions are very much, and racism is entrenched in our institutions, and the policies and structures have to change. But then we also have to change. We also have to become more sensitive, more sensitive than we really are now, because we all react in ways that come from our background, from the institutions around us, not just inside. I don't think we should have, we can be denying that we have those kinds of impulses, whatever you label them, but we react to other people who are different from us in different ways. I'm not white. I have some white blood, I guess, feel called blood, but we all react in ways that are affected by our backgrounds and the power system that surround us. So, but anyhow, I really am very thankful for this group for making this possible, and I would make sure that our members of our congregation get a copy of what is being proposed, and we all have to revisit what we have endorsed and in the context of what is being proposed right now, and to find a way of representation for us and way to communicate to UUA and make sure that they understand that there are some values that we will not want to sacrifice. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to mention that this organization, our website is uumuac.org. I hope someone puts that in the chat. That's the way to learn about us. And another, I think, important organization is the Fifth Principle Project, and their web address is fifthprincipleproject.org. We are the two principal large groups that are trying to resist what's going on in the UUA right now. Finley.
Comrades in the struggle, hope my voice is heard. It's lost its power. I got hit with a triple hit recently, heart trouble, lung cancer. Good news is, whatever is left of my voice, I want to share some thoughts. I'll begin by referring to one of my favorite theologians, Paul, regardless of his contradictions. He made a very profound statement that I first read in a Bible class at the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church prayer group. Quote, "For we struggle not against flesh and blood alone, but against wickedness in high places." Wickedness in high places. My historical struggle against what I later called neo-racism began in 1968, and I'll be giving a full presentation of that autobiographical history at our church service in December, third Wednesday in December, when I had to confront the Black nationalists in Atlanta, Georgia, led by some of their top intellectuals, Professor A.B. Spelman of Spelman College, Vincent Harding, eventually to become the head of the Institute of Black Studies. And we're coming from Sister's Chapel, where King's body was lying in state. And he knew where I stood on the issue of integration. And he said, with the typical mockery of the Black Power fanatics, "Well, he's gone. Now it's our turn." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "We're going to make sure," and I put words in his mouth, "that no white people will come to the King funeral. He belongs to Black people." I said, "Well, let's see what happens." King had his funeral, white people came. Why? There was a mobilization of people. At that time, it was the binary, Black and white, unite and fight. So since 1968, I have been battling. I fought Nazis physically. I took some bullets from a Klansman in Mississippi, so I fought the Klan physically. And I've been threatened with death by Afrocentric neo-racists physically. So I have no illusions about the nature of the Afrocentric neo-racist cabal. They have constantly been one of the secret weapons, more public now than ever before. They destroyed the movement toward the War on Poverty program that King put forward. You don't know this, but a white brother from Appalachia had joined the tent city in Washington during the march, and he was beaten to death by Black nationalists because they didn't want any white people there, even though it was a multiracial march. Wickedness in high places. We think of these folks as part of us who are either mistaken, ignorant. We use all kinds of words to sort of give them cover. Like we try to maybe talk about the Nazis, the National Socialists of Germany, misguided, misled. Hitler hypnotized them. We must come to grips with the fact that there is a power play in which the destruction of the UUA, as we have known it, is fundamental to the plan. I would not go into any conspiracy theories. It's just the policy. It has been the policy of the US ruling class to grudgingly desegregate, but not fully integrate. The Klan couldn't stop us in the integration movement. The Nazi movement at that time couldn't stop us. But Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, those Afrocentrics, they stopped us dead in our tracks. So that when we met in Cleveland or whenever the UUA met to have this discussion about Black empowerment, we got torpedoed, smashed. And it took a great deal of time and energy to recover from the tragedy of the Black empowerment movement, which was an effort to make sure that a multi-racial, biracial, Unitarian Universalism would not get off the ground. So that's my first point. Point number two, the struggle in the UUA today is about whiteness. Yeah, we're a predominantly white organization. So what? I go back to my metaphor of the Battle of Gettysburg, with an all-white group from Maine, many of whom had never met a Black person before, gave their lives at the Battle of Gettysburg to set the colored people free. When General Lee had said, or not General Lee, the Confederate head, whatever his name was, Jefferson Davis, no real white man would kill another white man to set the colors free. Well, they did it. These white men opened fire, ran out of ammunition, fixed bayonets, went down the hill, and saved the day at the Battle of Gettysburg, which is the basis of our freedom today. Our whiteness is not one way or another. It goes back to our vision, content of our character, not the color of our skin. And so what is the content of our character with this battle? Courage, strategic intelligence, imagination, methods by which we respond because we're committed to the theology of multiracial Unitarian Universalism, which has nothing to do who is sitting next to you in the pew, though we would like to have more people of color in there committed to this idea of multiracial Unitarian Universalism, like my good friend and brother, Kelvin Sandridge, and my sister, Sister Gonzalez. They're out there, but we're paralyzed right now. We're paralyzed with this inner struggle. So we got to take on this inner struggle. And once we are free from this inner struggle, then we go to the third and final point, what is to be done? This meeting is not designed to come up with strategies for struggle. We have other meetings coming up for that. We made a decision. We'll hear all kinds of different ideas, but we're not here to make a decision on a particular strategy except one. Whatever you were doing, continue to do it. Read the word, talk to people, get the petitions, write letters. By the way, to the brother who asked about the UU World, UMIAC submitted an ad. We were willing to pay $3,000. I think that was the amount to put an ad in the UU World. We were turned down as not being in good relations. So we tried that, didn't work. So try it again, I guess. What is basically to be done, and I conclude, is to build UMIAC, to recognize that racism is the primary contradiction in an imperialist world order, that racism is an international phenomenon stretching from Bulgaria against the Roma, to France against the immigrants, to China against the Uyghurs. Everybody's got a target population built upon the anti-Black paradigm developed at first by Jefferson. Another story, another narrative. What is to be done? We're going to be having a religious professional task force meeting next week, or in December at some time. Anyone who's a religious professional, lay or non-lay, we want you to join us and bring your talents to that discussion. And we'll get right at umiac.org to find out about our religious professional task force. I'm going to kick off my class again, The Nature of Racism, as soon as I recover from my treatments. We have a membership engagement committee meeting coming up. Those who want to talk more about organizing, UUA, nuclei, chapters, and how about this one, fellowships. We are the custodians of Article 2. We are it. They can't take it away from us. It's like trying to take away the 10 Commandments from Jews or the Sermon on the Mount from Christians. They can't take that away from us. Let them do what they want to do. I reached that position. I preached back in 2017, a schism was coming. A schism was coming, and schism is now slowly maturing. They're going to be 2 stepping stones toward an open break. 23, the pseudo election of the president of this Miss Betancourt, one of the leaders of the white supremacyology movement in our denomination. And then finally in 24, the full destruction of historic UUism. We want to be ready with an ARC, an anti-racist coalition of forces coming together. And don't forget Todd Ekloff as a part of our forces of resistance. He's trying to develop his church as a sort of a center, sort of the Geneva of a new UU out there in Spokane, Washington. So we got these 3 forces at work. 5th Principal Caucus was the J, Brother J, UUA under Brother Trudeau, and Brother Ekloff. So we got some forces, we got some things in play, but we got to finish the work. So let's take them on. Whatever way you want to do it, letters, pleadings, petitions, but the mobilizing, that's the key word. We must mobilize for Pittsburgh in 23, bring out our forces, whether they're delegates or not. And many people on Zoom or physically should be at Pittsburgh. One last point. One of the ways they're eliminating connections here in the Midwest, they've eliminated the Mid-America region April meeting, the assemblies they were called, where we could get together and share ideas. It's gone. The Midwest regional structure is gone. And the only thing they're going to have is something in Pittsburgh. So that's what we're up against, comrades. We're not struggling just against flesh and blood, but wickedness in high places. And the name that I give to that wickedness is a racist, imperialist system that shakes in its boots each time it thinks of people coming together, workers, students, and professionals to make changes. So may it be.
Thank you. I'm aware, first of all, that there's some people waiting with their hands up. I'm also aware that Wesley Frobacco, who doesn't have his hand up and doesn't have his camera on, but he said a 1-page statement that he'd like to read if there's time. And Wesley, if you can hear me, Wesley has a kind of slow internet, but Wesley, if you can hear me, if you're interested in reading that 1-page statement, this might be time to do it.
Well, I'm here, and the idea was to talk about the notion of covenant. I was asked to talk about it at some point. The problem is that I suppose in some sense it goes back to the way covenant is being presently used as to the way it began. Originally in New England, the refugees didn't like the hierarchies they were dealing with, so they came here, and the oldest churches had what they called covenants. Now, this is only the beginning of an evolution. It was simply an agreement, for example, that the First Church of Boston in 1630 is up and running with its 1630 covenant. And it isn't very complicated, nothing like this. These covenants had as their underlying basis things like the Golden Rule, which is still useful whether you're a humanist or not. They said, we solemnly and religiously promise and bind ourselves to walk in all our ways in mutual love and respect as a community. Not much. The same was true of the Universalists. They all began in the same sort of way. And they evolved, of course, in their structures. Which gets me to the Liberty Clause, which I was concerned might entirely disappear, although it still seems to be hanging around in this draft of C2. And the idea was that the congregations were not bound by any outside bodies. They could have their own expression of ideas and their agreements to be together without some kind of central orthodoxy. And I think what we're hearing today is the proposal of an orthodoxy. Because these covenants weren't creeds, they allowed development. Hence, we got to the humanists, both Universalist and Unitarian. And they come out of this whole thing. So I've been calling the whole thing the Liberty Clause as to freedom of belief and each congregation. One of the things I've been worried about is the question is, will you be able to hang on to your church property under this? If it's all structured from the top down, are they going to be able to tell you what you can do with your property? Will you have a place to meet anymore? Or will it all be dumped into the common fund for the one purpose? Because we all have other things. I was always, I remember going out in the street the day that after Martin Luther King was killed. And so I was always interested in social concerns and so forth down to the present. Do we have the liberty to change things? That's important. Unfortunately, at some point, the Liberty Clause got dropped and they prosecuted a minister from St. Paul for a while for believing in evolution of all things. And then they decided they better fix it. So about 1899, from 1870 to 1899, the Universalists dropped the Liberty Clause and they decided they better bring it back. I'm talking about how we need a Liberty Clause that continues in the Article 2C24 as it was, as we brought it, both the Universalists and the Unitarians together in 1961. Of all kinds, whether theist or humanist. And so, even among the Unitarians, Mr. Bisbee, who got prosecuted, was in the same boat as Emerson, who gave his divinity school address, which we now think was wonderful, and his views of nature and so forth. He didn't get back to Harvard for most of his career. It was a problem. And I see that as happening today. People losing their standing because they don't necessarily agree with the existing orthodoxy. I tend to go with, I can go with that we're talking about neo-racism, but we're also talking about neo-Puritanism. The idea that everybody must be absolutely pure. And if you're not pure, out you go. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, the dilemma is, and that's why I want to conclude with a vision. Emerson has recently been accused of racism. But in his journal, when he returned, and they finally let him back at Harvard. In his journal, Emerson said that from America, the asylum of all nations, all the European tribes, and now I want to underline this, all the Africans and the Polynesians and everybody else will make a new people. In other words, the ideal is not separating people because they're afraid of something that we must engage in nothing touching. Emerson seems to have proposed that we all marry one another, that we all live with one another, and that will be the new people. And eventually it will be the end of all of these kind of mad prejudices. And I'm afraid some of them are being perpetuated by what is the idea we're going to purge the denomination of all of our internal sins and we'll get down to it. Instead, let us all come together of every kind and color. We all have the same color of blood. We're all people. And that's where I want to end. I want to end in freedom and end in being free to sit together with my friends, whatever color or shape or whatever we are. And that's what I always thought that Unitarian Universalism stood for.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Wesley. Me too. John. Can't hear you, John.
Very quickly, just as the conversations came, I was wondering why we were not working more closely, but I suppose we are, but it doesn't seem to be evident why the Fifth Principle Project, which I'm a member of, why there isn't more, it's more obvious that we are working together or that we have common meetings together or that we join forces, because it's going to be a tough campaign in the months ahead. And we are the two groups. And I was just wondering what are we doing so that we can join forces and be more effective? Maybe with that's happening anyway, but I just don't know what's going on. That was one question. That was one question. And the other one was Karen suggested also a practical step, and that is to get into the discussion process with the UUA, that you have to get your comments in by the 28th of November. I may not really understand what she was trying to say, but I think I do. I think we have to, if we, as a group, we might have more effect if we participate in the discussion dialogue process with the UUA, and we all get our objections very clearly and our points very clearly across in that discussion process. And there is a discussion process, and talking amongst ourselves helps me to clarify my ideas, gives me the words to use those, and will help me to make my comments on the discussion process for the 28th of November. And I would think that should be encouraged. So those are two things: dialogue with the UUA, all participate, get in there, and the second is somehow or another join forces more clearly with the Fifth Principle Project. Voilà. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie.
Yeah, I'd just like to make sure people realize that if you ask me to send you the PDF, or if you ask to join the mailing list, I can't oblige you unless you either gave me your email in the chat or else you email me at julie@pinefish.com. So please do that. I'm planning to have, with regard to further discussion, I'm planning to have a Zoom in December, probably after the next rewrite of by UUA of the Article 2, so we could discuss the current version and what to do about this. I'm planning to have a Zoom, and I hope for some of the Fifth Principle Project people to join me there in that Zoom too. So anyway, everybody send me that wants the PDF or wants to be on the email list and continue this discussion after we close here. Do send me your email at julie@pinefish.com. Also, I'd like to remind everybody, please click on those 3 dots in the chat if you want to save the this chat at the end. Thank you.
Matt,
Yes, okay. Couple of quick points that have come up. I saw a comment in the chat questioning some of the discussions behind these issues, and my response is that there is a lot of background that feeds into this, and frankly, I think it is being used against those of us who have been more rank and file rather than ministers or lay leaders. And but it's used against us, just like when you're talking with evangelical Christians. If you can't quote chapter and verse, you're at a big disadvantage. It's an unfortunate thing. And about the process itself, I would point out that we are running out of time. I know at my home church, there's already being put out a call like, well, why don't you come forward to be a delegate? We want to have a full slate of delegates for General Assembly. Well, who is choosing those delegates? What will they stand for? Because Richard knows this as I do. General Assembly is run like a New England town meeting. It's not like everybody gets to vote, only delegates get to vote. So the real democratic process is effectively played out in delegate selection. Once the delegates are kind of set, most of them are not going as, what do you call it, uncommitted. They're being cultivated for where they are at the front end. So it's a matter of turning out your troops. And this again is heartbreaking because we should be finding ways to come together, not already be polarized, but perhaps it's too late for that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but is it not true that ordained ministers in fellowship are effectively superdelegates? They get to vote. They don't have to be appointed or anything else. Lastly, am I the only one here in this great group, and I've enjoyed the discussion, who is shaking? I mean, I'm a little freaked out by this whole thing. Emotions, though, have the power cognitively of overwhelming thinking. I hope either afterwards or maybe it's part of the process that will come, we have a moment to recognize just how frightening and anger generating this whole issue can be. And you know, there are those who know in the heat of battle, you have to keep your head in the game. And when we're freaking out, that's a bit hard to do. So I wish us all well in this. Thanks a lot. I really love this meeting.
Jay.
So I put it in the chat, the form to fill out, and I know there's some skepticism about what will this do. I don't want to change the language. I want to kill the beast. But I think it's important that we record, because one option is, will you support this, yes or no? And I think it's good they get a pre-count that this is going to be, is not acceptable. And the more people that express that opinion, the more important it is. So I'm just saying, I'm in just flooding the zone right now. So Frank and I have discussed another article that will appear on the Fifth Principle Project website about yet another controversy. We've been trying to keep the focus on Article 2, and that is about the selection of the presidential candidate. Our bylaws require that 2 candidates come forward, be appointed for election. That's what the bylaws said. In fact, we voted on that in 2020 to reaffirm that and give a clear directive to the association. But again, only 1 candidate was put forward. A number of us have written Susan Frederick Gray and the moderators and secretary of the association. I would also again request that people, I'll put the link to the press release about that. Also send letters to Susan Frederick Gray and to our moderator saying this is unacceptable, just completely unacceptable. We should have a competitive race and we should have a chance to debate things. So, I mean, this is a situation with many fronts, and I agree with Matt. The key thing is to get delegates. It's a whip counting exercise in the end.
Lincoln.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that, and thank you, Jay. I just wanted to mention that I have created a shared folder for sharing documents on my Google Drive that I have given rights to everyone in Julie's UU intercongregational discussion list. So if you send a message to Julie, she's put it in the chat, she can do it again, asking to be invited, she'll get you invited. You could also send it to me. She made me a co-administrator. In any case, there's a place for us to share documents where you don't have to go hunting through emails to find a shared PDF or something or other that somebody shared. And I'll put some of my documents in there, and I hope to see others put, like the side-by-side comparison has been very, very popular because it really sticks in your face what's deleted, better than my document does, actually, because I did it linearly. So I just wanted to mention that. I'll be done.
Thank you. Brian, it looks like you're going to be the last one.
Okay, I just wanted to make a quick comment on as to things happening in General Assembly on the floor. And I'd like to add to what was said earlier that I've been a delegate only once, but I discovered that things tend to get massaged in smaller meetings, and once they're on the floor, it's likely to be too late to have much of an impact.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Finley, do you have some kind of benediction for us? Whoop, can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Since we're coming to the conclusion, we've always got to have closing words, so I feel blessed to be allowed to do this. Personally, I'm retiring from racial justice activism as of December 31st, 2022. I mean, I'm turning it all over to whoever's here wants to pick up. And I feel so confident based upon this program we had today. When I came up with the idea, Brother Truett is always saying, "Oh, hey, you got another idea for something to do." I mean, well, sometimes they work. Our international conference did not quite work as I wanted it to, but we did it. And this, of course, has been splendid. Let's start being celebratory. Let's celebrate now. Let's do some celebration. I want us to celebrate in December. We're having a celebration. We're showing a movie. I want everybody who has a movie projector or a big television screen or a little television screen to rent the video, The Defiant Ones, starring Sidney Poitier as a Black nationalist and Tony Curtis as a white racist, chained together trying to escape from a chain gang. The ending is splendid. Of course, the Black nationalists hated that ending. Show that movie, get your people over there, show this movie. Remind us of the metaphor of light and dark-skinned people chained together, trying to figure out a way to fight forward. I want us to celebrate in December the victory of the Montgomery, Alabama boycott. In December 26, 1956, around Christmas, the Supreme Court gave it a present to that work of those masses of people, Black and some whites, that there'll be no more segregation in any form of public transportation in the entire United States. Let's celebrate that. Let's remember that. On January 1st, I want us to celebrate the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. What a victory. Impossible, it was said in 1850. It'll never happen. 1863, January 1st. We used to call it watch night in my religious tradition, but they have to do it in the middle of the night. I've written a play called Oh Freedom, the Day of Jubilee. I'll send out the copy. Do the play. It has music, dance, drama, and shows the multiracial nature of the struggle against slavery. And of course, Martin Luther King's birthday is coming up. Let's celebrate it, not with racial separation, but remembering his last battle to support the poor brothers and sisters of the world, regardless of color. I want us to remember Viola Liuzzo and James Reeb and the three brothers that died in Mississippi. Find out when they died. Put that on your calendar. Celebrate their victory. We will not lose it. We will not let it be gone. And always remember, this is scary. This is very scary for white brothers and sisters. You too are a victim of anti-Black racism. And the way you can see it is the destruction of a white denomination by a handful of Afrocentric neo-racists and their white allies. And it's being done, yeah, ideologically, that's true. Yes, ideological, theological. There's some theology behind this process. Neo-Puritanism, good word. But it's also for privilege and power, for money, $5.1 million. So my brothers and sisters, we leave this gathering much more successful than I could ever imagine. It is beautiful, it is powerful. It might have only one last thing to say. If you're not a member of UMIAC, join us. We welcome you to our ranks. So may it be, and we extinguish the chalice. Okay.
Now, before we leave the meeting, any of you who want to save the chat, now's the time, because when the host ends the meeting, if you haven't done it, the chat will be lost. But if you go down to those three dots at the bottom of the chat and you click on them and you get the menu, one of the first item, I believe, on the menu is Save Chat. And if you do that, it'll be saved to your computer. And I'm going to wait about a minute and then leave the meeting.
Thanks, everyone. Let's do it again.
Thanks to everyone.
Thank you all for coming.
Richard,
Yes?
about the chat,
Yes?
I'd like to point out to people who may not be familiar with it, if you've already saved it, you still have to save it again to get anything that's been posted since you last saved it.
Yes.
And it will automatically update the file. You don't have to worry about that. It will take care of that by itself. And it's saved in a document. It's saved in the documents folder under Zoom. That's where you can find it on your computer.
Thank you. Yes.
Hope that helps.
Yes.
I want to thank Richard for presiding and our host for doing a wonderful job. Thanks, everyone. Great seeing you.
Matt, why don't you end the meeting?
Oh, you need me to end the meeting?
Well, I'm not the host.
Oh, I'm the host.
Either you
Oh,
or
it's not gonna. If Alan signed off without making me host, I don't think I can end the meeting. I can just leave it.
Yes. Well, if you click leave, then it'll say end for all.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Hi, Molly.